Hello, listener. This is Tom from Paperback Warrior Podcast. It's Christmas week, and we are still on hiatus based on the idea that no one listens to podcasts in December. However, we're going to hedge that bet with a rerun episode for you this week from August 2019, when we were just young, fledgling podcasters. The episode is called Building a Reader's Library, and it's a feature I'm actually pretty proud of. We also do some book reviews, and Eric goes on a shopping trip to a store that actually no longer exists. So we're going to be back live with new shows on Monday, January 4, but check us out next Monday because we have a pretty cool placeholder for you then. For today, I want to present you with Paperback Warrior episode number 9 from August 2019 called Building a Reader's Library. Have a Merry Christmas, guys. Enjoy the rerun.
Thanks for listening. You're back to the Paperback Warrior podcast. Last week, Tom taught all of us a little bit about how to buy paperback books online and in places like yard sales and library book sales. We all learned quite a bit. It was a great episode. If you didn't listen to that one, check it out. It was last week's episode. This week, we might be exploring a little bit more of the same. Tom's going to tell us a little bit about what's on schedule for today.
All right, so our feature today, I'm going to be discussing how to get organized with your paperback collection and turn it into something that you're really going to be proud to have in your home. We have reviews. Eric's going to review a book called Spy Killer by Jimmy Sangster, and I'm going to review a book called Bloody Vengeance by Jack Ehrlich. However, Eric, before we get started into that, you've been doing some book shopping.
Yeah, and if you haven't been to Jacksonville before, Jacksonville is freaking huge. From top to bottom, I think it's like, 50, 60 miles from top to bottom?
I think it's like the largest city by landmass in the United States.
Yeah, not population, but this in scope, it's ginormous. So this particular bookstore is called Black Sheep Books, and it sits in a part of Jacksonville that I don't normally visit very often. I really don't get in the area, but this weekend I was up that way and decided I would stop by. I knew about Black Sheep through Tom. He had actually turned me on to it last year, and I had stopped in there for the first time and talked with the owner. He's a very nice guy, and he had a stack of near mint condition Avenger paperbacks, those old Warner Library paperbacks that were written under a house name Kenneth Robeson. But he had a whole stack of them. I ended up getting them for, I guess, about $60 for 15 of them after negotiation, so I was very pleased. And this time, I was able to negotiate with him a little bit more, and I bought 38 bagged Doc Savage Bantam paperbacks. This was, again, under the house name Kenneth Robeson. I guess they're a little bit common. I find them from time to time, but not quite this many at one time. So again, I was able to get 38 of those, and some of those were double editions, which are kind of hard to find. I was also able to negotiate a little bit more on 6 Phantom paperbacks, as well as a science fiction sort of Conan book called Lord of Blood by Dave Van Arnhem. Apparently it's a sequel to Star Barbarian, and I'm not sure why they just didn't go with Starbarian. It would make more sense, but anyway, Star Barbarian it is. In addition to those, I got 3 of the early Jack Higgins novels on Fawcett Gold Medal. I was really pleased to find those. And I got an action-adventure book called The Shooter by a guy named Gregory Van He. I'll have to do some research and figure out who that is. But when I say negotiated the price, I mean, these books were on the shelves. I mean, they're there for the buying public, but they're priced between $5.50 and $10 each. So it really would have been an expensive trip, but I had to whittle away the price a little bit, and maybe that's something Tom can teach us all about in a future episode. But this store it's a small store, but it's really well organized. It's clean, and the owner, he spends a lot of time there, and he's a little bit meticulous on his organization. But I found a large stack of bagged Shadow paperbacks that I had to pass on. I was out of money. He had Mission Impossible books. I saw The Girl from Uncle, number 2, I believe, that he had in there. He had tons of Alistair MacLean books. I'd say probably 100 or more Mac Bolan books. And he had 30 Donald Hamilton books just sitting there kind of off on their own. And most of those were the Matt Helm series, which are highly desirable. So I guess it was maybe 20, 25 bagged John Carter novels. And along the same line, he also had a large stack of bagged, looks like near mint Tarzan paperbacks. He had the Horse Clan series, which I've been kind of interested in. I think he had the whole set, and he had some Doctor Who, some Casca, some Conan, and even some old Dark Shadows books, which I've never really seen out in the wild. But again, it's Black Sheep Books. If you're ever in the area in Jacksonville, traveling through the Deep South, Jacksonville's got a lot of great stores. This is one of them. Great store, friendly owner, decent pricing, so it's definitely worth checking out.
3 years ago, when I moved to Jacksonville from Hawaii, on my very first day in Jacksonville, before my family arrived, I was staying in temporary housing, and I drove to Black Sheep Books in Chamblin's, the one we talked about in episode 1, back to back. And so I've been going to Chamblin's a lot more. Black Sheep Books would be like this amazing bookstore if it wasn't in the same town as Chamblin's, which is the greatest bookstore in America, probably. But I like Black Sheep. The owner of Black Sheep used to do an interesting thing where he would take old vintage paperbacks, put them in one of those put them in the paperback bags, and he would take the plastic of the bag and he would thumbtack it to the edges of the plywood or the wooden bookshelves. And so you'd be walking around the corner from one shelf to another, and there'd be a bunch of paperbacks up there. I ended up buying nearly all of those paperbacks, and you could actually, if you walk there, you could still see the holes in the wood where these books had been thumbtacked up there for years. I remember buying a book called Not I, Said the Vixen by Bill S. Ballinger. He also has a decent Western room there with lots of old horror novels, I think, are in the same room, as well as tons of Westerns. A lot of William Johnstone, which is very typical. You see that, but he had a good number of long arms as well.
Yeah, I've yet to be able to really conquer that room. It's just overwhelming to me when I look in there and just see the amount of books. So I didn't spend a lot of time in there, but it looks massive.
Yeah, I mean, if you've seen one decent Western selection in a used bookstore, you've kind of seen them all. There seems to be just more variety in the books you're going to see in other genres. Anyway, that's Black Sheep Books. Definitely worth visiting if you come to Jacksonville. And let us know if you do. We'd be happy to meet you there and kind of give you a guided tour. So what I want to do is shift gears here into building your paperback library part 2. Last episode, I talked about how to acquire paperbacks. This episode, I want to talk about why to acquire paperbacks and what to do once you have them, essentially getting organized. Now, I'm talking to very specific listeners here because I'm talking about a reader's library that I want to convince you to build, not a book collection. I know we have lots of listeners who love to encase their books in plastic, and they can name every cover artist, and you guys, we're happy that you're listening, but we also know that you are paralyzed with fear to actually open a book because you may be the last reader of it. I honestly don't know what to do with any of you, and I have really zero helpful advice for you. What I'm talking to is the readers among us, the guy or gal who always has an old paperback sticking out of his back pocket, who whips it out when he has 45 seconds of free time in the elevator or when he's pumping gas to read a page or two. And that's the guy I'm talking to, and that's the kind of library that I have and the kind of library that Eric has. So the question is, why bother building a home library? And why, especially a library like Eric has or I has, where there's more books in that library than you're ever going to live long enough to read. And there's a good reason to do that. And that's because your home library should be the greatest used bookstore in the world for you to browse when it comes time to pick the next book to read. One of the few simple pleasures of my life is once a week or 2 times a week, depending on how much reading I'm able to get done, finishing a book, going to my library, and then browsing my own library for what am I going to read next. I don't keep a queue of books in a stack waiting to know what I'm going to read next, because I don't know what mood I'm going to be in. Unless you're psychic, you don't know what you're going to want to read next in the future. And so you want to have a vast selection of options on your shelves, which is why you think of it like groceries. When you buy groceries, you buy different kinds of food for your pantry because you don't know what you're going to be in the mood to eat. You may be in the mood for steak. You may be in the mood for Fruit Loops. Books should be the same way, where you have tons and tons of books to choose from, and every single one of these books appealed to you at one time or another. People are going to come to your house, they're going to see your library, and they're going to ask you the dumbest question on planet Earth. They're going to say, have you read all these books? I want you to be patient with these people and say, and explain to them that there's nothing more miserable and depressing than a library filled with books that you've already read. That'd be like keeping a collection of used condoms around. What kind of lunatic do you think I am?
I would encourage you to don't overbuy your books. Buy as many books as you can shelve in your home in a neat and organized way. There's really no reason to display more books than you have shelves to accommodate. You don't want to be a hoarder of books. If you aren't into reading Conan books anymore, make some shelf space for yourself. Sell, trade, or gift the Conan books you'll never read again. If you can't part with them, put them in a box, store them in your basement, your attic, your garage, or under your bed. If your library is filled with clutter, that becomes stressful to you and annoying to the people you live with. Maybe your family members, maybe your roommates. You want your library to be something you're proud of. If you have good shelving, you can fit a ton of books on one shelf. For instance, I am right now in the process. I used to love Rex Stout's Nero Wolfe series. I think I might have outgrown them or burned out on them. I don't like them as much. I have a bunch of them, and I'm going to be getting rid of them so I can make room for books that I might enjoy based on what I like today. Early when I was collecting, I acquired hundreds of books in the Long Arm, Gunsmith, and Trailsman series of adult westerns because there was a bookstore called Jellies in Honolulu, Hawaii that went out of business, and I basically bought their entire collection of used adult western paperbacks for like $20. I like those books, but if I read one or two a year, that's plenty. I don't need the hundreds that are occupying my precious shelf space, so I need to get rid of those myself. So I'm not claiming to be perfect here. Again, your library should be neat and well organized. You don't have to be a hoarder, and this can be done. And the secret to that is getting good shelving. Too many of us buy shelves that were built for giant hardcover books, and what I recommend is for your paperback library, DVD shelving units. You can get them cheap on Amazon or at Walmart or anywhere around. And the DVD shelves are the absolute perfect size for storing the mass market paperbacks that you collect. What you don't want is a lot of empty shelf space between the edge of the spine and the end of the shelf, because that creates more places to dust. You also don't want to be one of those maniacs who stack your books 2 or 3 deep on the shelf. You want this to be a pleasant browsing experience for you when it comes time to pick out the next book you're going to read. If you have the ability to build your own shelves, go ahead and do so. I have no talent in that regard, but don't build them to be deep shelved, and don't build a ton of airspace between your rows. The shelves should be constructed to accommodate the book with as little extra space as possible. This minimizes the amount of floor space it's going to take up in your library, and it's going to give you, the consumer, more dancing room in the room that you're storing your books. Remember that the purpose is to give you a pleasant browsing experience when it comes time to pick the next book. And you don't want to make your library a stressful eyesore to the people in your family. If you keep things neat and organized, it's going to make your library something to be proud of when you show it to guests, instead of being like a dungeon and a testament to your mental illness. The question then comes up, how do you organize your home library? And believe it or not, while I feel strongly about making your library look sharp and good and filled with books that you intend to read someday, I don't feel strongly about how you organize it. You're the consumer who's going to be browsing this library, and you're going to know what makes sense for you. I shelve things by author's last name, and I have basically shelves for different genres. I have a Western shelf and then kind of a mystery and all other shelf. I also have a place from all my anthologies. And when I'm in the mood for a Western, I like to go to the Western shelf, and then I organize that by author's last name. However, I know that there's people out there who like the aesthetics of putting all their ace doubles in one section and their hard case crimes in another section. That's fine. I'm not here to judge you or even tell you how you want to organize your library. But what I want to encourage you to do is to avoid the temptation of going to IKEA and buying bookshelves that are 8 feet tall, but only give you 6 shelves. Because again, all you're doing is creating a lot of airspace, and you're tempting yourself to stack books up like you're the crazy lady at the flea market, as opposed to in an organized fashion. Now, how do you organize your books, Eric? I know we're sitting here in your library right now, and I know it's a little different than the way mine are disorganized.
Yeah, I have the DVD shelves. So my paperbacks fit snugly in there. There's not a lot of space between the shelves. I got these off of Amazon. I want to say they were laser line, but I can't remember. I'll have to look it up and maybe let you know on the next episode. But I've got 3 fairly large shelving units, and I don't know how many books I have. What do you think, Tom? 1,000?
Yeah, 1,000. I think
1,000-ish.
Yeah, every one of these holds probably about 800 books. So you're into the thousands, and it's just very neat looking. Like, there's nothing to be embarrassed about with this library here. And even if you had just one of these, even if you had just one bookshelf of these DVD shelving cases that's about 6 or 7 feet tall, you can fit a ton of books there. And then basically you can keep everything else in boxes in your garage and rotate the books in or out based on what you enjoy reading now. You are the audience for this. Your library is not a storage space. It is a library, and show some pride in it.
Mine are all together. All my Westerns and action and everything's together. The only thing I segregated out was just horror, and I've got horror in trunks just because I don't read as much horror as I used to. But mine are A to Z by author, and I bought some bookends to maximize the shelf space, and I put those up on top to give me an extra shelf. But it's funny that he talks about this tonight because I just bought 3 more of these shelving units off of Amazon. They go for $70 a piece. Pretty expensive, and I don't know how portable these things are if I decide to move, but they look so good I couldn't resist it. So I've got 3 more coming for the other side of my my office here, on the other side of the wall. But at the top, I also like to take some books that I like to look at the art. I take those books and I put them up the top. I'm in my office all day. I work from home and I stare at my book collection. So occasionally I'll just switch out the book covers at the top just to have something new to look at. But I really like the way that I have mine set up. And again, I don't collect hardback books, so I have no use for hardbacks, and I don't have any room for them. So I'm strictly just a paperback guy. I don't even really like the and I think, Tom, you're the same way. I don't really like the softback books because they just don't fit anywhere.
You mean the trade paperbacks?
Yeah.
I have one shelf to accommodate those because a lot of the reprint houses, the Brash Books, Stark House, Armchair Fiction, all print right now in trade paperbacks. That seems to be the way the industry is going. So I have a shelf for those, and they're all segregated together, but I wish I could shrink them down to mass market size. Anyway, so that's my little talk as far as how to get organized with your paperback book collection. I've started writing these things, these kind of last week's episode and this week's episode into a giant article, and it got really big, and I haven't finished it. Maybe by the time this podcast posts, I will have something out there that we can put on paperbackwarrior.com, and I hope you found some of this helpful.
Yeah, that was really helpful to me. And speaking of book size, too, I really like what Black Gat does and Hardcase Crime because they both print in the normal 50, 60 style paperbacks.
Yes, but Hardcase Crime has announced they've stopped doing mass market paperbacks and they are only doing trade paperbacks from now on, which just sort of makes me throw my hands up in disgust.
Yeah, that's ridiculous. But anyway, I guess moving on to the reviews this week. My first review here is a book called Spy Killer, and it was written by a British author named Jimmy Sangster. He was born in 1927, passed away in 2011. Sangster was a screenwriter, he was a director, and he worked for Hammer Horror Films in the 50s and 60s. He did films like Curse of Frankenstein, Dracula, Lust for a Vampire. Not really the espionage spy thrillers that you'd think of, but he capitalized on the success of Ian Fleming's James Bond empire, and he created a lady spy novel called Touch Feather, and he wrote a sequel called Touch Feather 2, and both of those came out in 1968, 1970. He created a British spy named John Smith, kind of a bland name, but he starred his British spy John Smith in 2 books, 1967's Private Eye and 1968's Foreign Exchange. Well, New York Times best-selling authors Lee and Joel Goldberg resurrected Jimmy Sangster's work with their imprint called Brash Books. You can check out Brash Books. It's brash-books.com. They renamed Private Eye as The Spy Killer and released both of Sangster's John Smith books this week. They actually came out today, I believe. Both have new artwork and are available as digital and print versions on Amazon. And again, they're in that trade size, which doesn't fit on my shelf, but that's okay. Brash Books has done a really good job with a lot of these older books. They've masterminded the majority of Ralph Dennis's body of work. Ralph Dennis was an Atlanta author. His Hardman series was a series of 1970s sort of violent, hard-boiled novels. So Brash Books put out the whole series. They've really been delving into Ralph Dennis's archives. In fact, I think Lee Goldberg over the summer was in Durham, North Carolina, going through some old manuscripts to try to dig up some more of his work. But anyway, today's episode is focusing on the spy killer. And the spy killer, when we first meet this character, John Smith, he's this broke private eye, and he's kind of struggling to fulfill all of his financial obligations. So he's kind of in dire straits. So he's absolutely delighted when a paying client finally walks in his office, but it's his ex-wife, which is really awkward. She wants him to track down her new husband, which is a guy named Dunning, and she feels like Dunning is having an affair on her with a man named Allworthy. So Smith is absolutely giddy to receive money from his ex's misfortune. So he agrees to tail her husband in hopes of, I guess, photographing him with his new lover. And Smith learns that Dunning is a principal undersecretary for Britain's Foreign Office. So he's kind of a big deal. And he learns that, he basically learns that where Dunning is living, and that Dunning and his suspected lover Allworthy are going to be meeting at Allworthy's house that night. So we've got Smith, who's going to go to Allworthy's house and hopefully photograph the two of them together. So he shows up with his camera, he knocks on Allworthy's door, and is surprised when Allworthy rushes out to meet him and says, "Oh, thank God you're here." And Smith is really perplexed by his behavior. So the two of them rush inside, and Allworthy shows Smith the dead body of Dunning. And Allworthy says he's going to be sick, so he goes to the kitchen, and Smith calls the police. So apparently Allworthy called the police when he found Dunning dead, and then he thought that Smith was a cop showing up with a camera. You follow me so far, Tom?
Yeah, no, I got it. I'm following.
I just want to make sure that wasn't too confusing.
No, that sounds good.
Yeah. But the interesting part is when the police show up, Allworthy's nowhere to be found. He just skipped town. He's nowhere. And so Smith is the only suspect. So Smith goes to jail, and he feels like someone's blackmailed him with this whole scheme. So this time around the book, I guess it's maybe, I don't know, 3, 4, or 5 chapters in, we get some insight on who John Smith is. And he was an international spy and did a lot of great work for Britain, but he retired to become this poor private eye. So to help prove his innocence, his old boss Max shows up at the jail to offer him a deal. And Max is, we think early on that Max is kind of a weird character. He seems like he's got a lot of tricks up his sleeve. But he offers Smith this deal that he'll get him off the hook of this weird murder if he will accept a new mission that revolves around the Chinese uncovering some American spies in the Red State. So it may sound like I've spoiled the book for you with all this, but I assure you there's a lot more to this book than just that. There's a lot of plot twists. Sangster builds in, these narratives where who's betraying who. There's various enemies. You can tell Sangster really has a lot of fun with this book. I really enjoyed it a lot. I'm recommending it to you. I think you can get it fairly affordably, whether it's physical or in digital. I'm reading the second book now, which is called Foreign Exchange. And again, that's out today as well, along with Spy Killer. So you can get them both now on Amazon. Be sure to follow Lee Goldberg and Brash Books on Facebook, Twitter. You can get all the updates on their releases. And look for reviews of Spy Killer and Foreign Exchange today. I believe they're both online at paperbackwarrior.com. And I guess that's really it.
All right, good. Great. That was a review of Spy Killer by Jimmy Sangster. You should definitely check that out. And you should also support Brash Books. Lee Goldberg's been a supporter of our website and the podcast, and he's just really doing God's work as far as resurrecting a lot of these great old titles. I want to shift gears a little bit and review a book called Bloody Vengeance by Jack Ehrlich. Ehrlich is spelled Ehrlich. I might be mispronouncing it, but let's go with Ehrlich for now. Ehrlich was an Edgar Award-winning mystery writer who authored a 1972 Western called The Fastest Gun in the Pulpit that was adapted to the screen for a 1974 TV movie starring Slim Pickens. And I think that was probably his best-selling book. He also wrote a mystery series for Dell that has very alluring covers starring a parole officer named Robert Flick. In fact, this week I just bought one of his Robert Flick books called Slow Burn, which was one of the titles. He was just one of these working authors who was cranking away stuff, and he did lots of standalone books as well. The one I want to talk about is Bloody Vengeance from 1974. The cover is just absolutely a terribly boring cover. This is the other thing I should mention is that the review for this one doesn't come out this week on Paperback Warrior. You have to go into the archives. I'll try to post on Facebook a show note when we post the podcast linking you to it, but go into the Paperback Warrior archives and find this review, because I think it's you're going to find it interesting, especially if you like serial vigilante books. Anyway, it says, kill cops on a mission of vengeance to wipe up the scum the law can't touch. That's the tagline. I can only assume that this book was Pocketbook's attempt to capitalize on the vigilante fiction craze that had started a few years earlier by Don Pendleton's series The Executioner, starring Mac Bolan. There were a ton of serial vigilante novels there. This was a standalone, though. There was never a book 2, and unfortunately the publisher slapped this terrible cheap photo cover on Ehrlich's paperback, and it remains largely forgotten. And I think that's a real shame, because the book is incredibly compelling. Ehrlich wrote the narrative of police lieutenant Rob Royce in first person as if it were some kind of memoir. So Royce is able to solve the murder of a woman by the name of Mary who'd been dismembered and raped with a Coke bottle in the opening chapter. And so solid police work leads him to the arrest of this psycho by the name of Harry Jacko. And in a normal mystery novel, that would have been this satisfying ending, but this is just chapter 1 or 2 of this vigilante paper book, because Jacko beats the case and walks thanks to some legal technicalities. And this irritates the hell out of Royce, who exacts some, you guessed it, bloody vengeance with the help of his partner. So Royce and his partner find this experience of frontier justice, of actually killing Jacko themselves when they're off duty, so satisfying, they decide to settle another old score of another deplorable criminal who beat the system. Anyway, so this whole process of being like cops by day, vigilantes by night, reinvigorates these guys and their sense of right and wrong and good and evil. And word spreads among the police department, and other officers want to get into the act of exacting vengeance on the people who are like beating the system. And so I don't want to spoil anything, but this one man's vigilante action evolves into essentially a secret organization of police officers who are taking advantage, who are killing these criminals at night. And then it evolves into a movement that spreads into other departments. So I guess, Eric, remember the Guardian Angels in the 1970s and 80s, those guys who used to ride the subways wearing their berets, and basically, essentially just forming a neighborhood watch on the subways in New York. Remember those guys?
Yes.
Okay, so imagine if the Guardian Angels were all off-duty cops who were able to kick ass with the understanding that the on-duty cops are going to look the other way. That's the basic premise of this book. Anyway, the story evolves into an interesting parable about the kind of corrupting nature of power and celebrity. I love this book. I would go so far to say the first half is more exciting because it becomes to a bit of a parable, and the author fails to address the thorny issues that the premise of unchecked police powers in any nation should beg. But again, we're not looking at this book as some sort of allegory or some sort of book club selection. This is just a fantastic adventure novel. It's a crime-fighting, right-wing, wish-fulfillment fable with awesome action scenes, and it never becomes cartoonish or stupid. I would go so far to say that Bloody Vengeance is among the best 1970s vigilante novels I've ever read. I think War Against the Mafia might be a slightly better novel. That's the first Mac Bolan Executioner book by Don Pendleton. But man, this one would have been a monster hit if it had a better cover. And I've seen it around in used bookstores every now and then. You can get it online cheap. The cover's absolutely horrible, so don't let that chase you away from it. As of this writing, it's not available on Kindle, and so you have to seek out in the used paperback novel. And if you choose to do that, I promise you, you will not regret it. Anyway, that's my review of Bloody Vengeance by Jack Ehrlich.
All right, sounds good. I'm going to look for that one. We've got a couple more extra minutes here. We did this a couple episodes back, and Tom might not even remember what he's read because he reads so many books. But what were your favorite books for the month of August? Can you remember what you read?
I really liked, I mentioned it last episode, this book by Jerry Pournelle, the science fiction author. He wrote 2 spy novels. First one was called Red Heroine, and the second is called Red Dragon, and it has nothing to do with the Hannibal Lecter book. It's one of those, like, a civilian guy gets roped into helping out the CIA on a case. And the premise between Red Heroine is that these university anti-war hippies during the Vietnam era, again, this was written in the late 60s, get into being manipulated by the Chinese commies, and the Chinese commies in Red China back in the day had trouble getting their hands on U.S. dollars. It wasn't like today's open economy where these third world nations can get U.S. dollars through international trade. Red China was pretty shut off. And so the idea is Red China is involved in basically heroin importation into the U.S. as a means by which to make money to fund their communist propaganda. And it's just very realistic. I was surprised on what a realistic novel it was. Not that I have all sorts of expertise as far as how the CIA operated in the 1960s, but it was never cartoonish or over the top like a Nick Carter book. It was just a really solid book, and I'm looking forward to reading the sequel. How about you? You read anything good lately?
Yeah, I read a really good Western called Trag's Choice by Clifton Adams. I thought it was really well written, a little bit unusual, a Western tale. I think Clifton Adams tries to write traditional Westerns, but then he realizes that he's pretty dynamic when his writing style. So what he starts out as a traditional Western turns into more of like a hard-boiled kind of mystery, or maybe even a little bit of crime noir with his Westerns. So that's probably one of my favorites that I've read recently. Looking ahead for this month, just kind of give you an idea of what's on tap for paperbackwarrior.com for the month of September. We're going to have reviews for the folks like Clifton Adams. I'm looking at the list here. Bill Pronzini, Henry Kane, Charles Willeford, Paul Ernst, which wrote the Pulp Avenger series under Kenneth Robeson. I guess, well, you got a Lawrence Block in there towards the end of August, early September. Jimmy Sangster we just talked about. Then we look at a couple of new ones that we hadn't talked about before. Denison's War series is represented for this month, and you've got Peter Crane, which you reviewed. Jason Stryker, another series. So a lot of fun stuff coming for the month of September. Again, that's at paperbackwarrior.com. New reviews every single weekday at 6 a.m. Those review links are posted on our Facebook and Twitter feeds around the same time. And you can always check Instagram as well. Remember, new show episodes every Monday, just about anywhere that streams podcast. And archive reviews on our social media every afternoon at 2 p.m. So a lot of great stuff coming your way for September. Really excited, looking forward to it. That's about all I have for the show. What do you have, Tom? Anything left?
No, I'm going to Chicago. I'm going to be doing some used bookstore shopping there. There's a fantastic used bookstore on Belmont Avenue, right by the Belmont Red Line stop, called The Gallery Books. The owner is actually a very knowledgeable and nice guy. He doesn't have a reputation of always being a nice guy because he warns you to turn off your cell phone. And if you're talking on your cell phone in his store, he will throw you out in your ear. But as long as you comply with that, he's the nicest guy in the world and knows a lot about paperbacks. The downside is that it's in a pretty high rent district and the books aren't exactly cheap, but it has tons of stuff that it's just you can't find elsewhere in a used bookstore. But the vintage paperbacks there really are for collectors. So I'll come back next episode and tell you what I found, if anything. I just like browsing there, if nothing else.
All right, sounds good. We'll look forward to that. That's all we have for this show. Thanks again for listening. And remember, if you don't buy it, Tom will.
And clean up your bookshelves, you pigs.
Bye-bye.